This is your fortnightly instalment where I interview a trailblazing physiotherapist that has shaped the profession we are today. In celebrating their journey, knowledge and insights, you gain the opportunity to plan and guide your own professional journey. My name is Doug Carey and welcome to Physio+10. So welcome back to followers of Physio+10 and new listeners. Today's special guest is Craig Purdam. Thanks for joining us, Craig.
Oh, sorry, you got me at the wrong time. Thank you, Doug. It's wonderful to be here. Congratulations on your work in pulling this together. It's really a great concept, and let's hope that we can inspire a few people to either stay in or get involved in their various areas of passion within physio.
Awesome. So, what was it that sparked your interest in physiotherapy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I vividly remember my sister had she had a couple of episodes of dislocating her patella, and that required follow-up physio. In the end, she ended up having a patella transplant or transplanted tibial plateau, but. Yeah, so the local physio, his name was Roger Smith, and my sister saw him a number of times, and it sounded like something that was interesting to me, but it was never much more than that. And in fact, my great passion through school was to be a physics teacher. We had a really inspiring physics teacher who I still remember to this day, and yeah, he just really got me, you know. And I love the concept of teaching, and in fact, I guess in physio I've never been too far from it, but I've loved the I just what he inspired in me, and so I was going to become a physics teacher. So when I matriculated, I went to Monash University for a year, to the year of science, majoring in physics. But look, I wasn't the best student. I think I was 16 when I went to uni, which was I was too young. Got too wrapped up in the in the early 70s in those stages, and you know, bands in the courtyard every lunchtime, and a lot of the time I didn't make it to after lessons and that sort of thing. And yeah, I was a terrible student. I really was in my first year of uni. So I was a long way from physio at that stage. In fact, I had to think long and hard about continuing uni, which I decided not to. Then started looking around for what I wanted to do, and explored a number of different things, including physio. I still kept, you know, wondering what it would be like, and the one driving thing for me was I knew I wanted to work with people. You know, I just had this yen about working with people. I have no idea why. So we went along and we had to do an interview to get into physiotherapy, and he was the head of school, Pat Trott, Fat Pat she was known as, and she was just an absolute icon. So think, you know, Gwen Jull or one of those, probably almost half a generation before Gwen. And anyway, so we went in and we had our interview, and we had to demonstrate that our hands were strong enough to be able to be a physio at that stage. And
how'd you do that? Just out of interest?
Oh yeah, she said, "I'll squeeze my hands," and you know, you had to know you weren't a wimp, and you had a proper handshake and all of that.
Pat Trott test.
And yes, and then as well as that, you know, there's probably some interpersonal features and stuff around it too. But yeah, I was, from then on, it was something I think I really wanted to do. And anyway, I went away and we didn't hear much more. And this is at Lincoln Institute. Now, Lincoln Institute was just in the phase of changing over from diploma to degree. And as I've told you, I was a very poor student, or had a very poor student record coming into this. So so they ran a diploma and a degree course concurrently, and so all the dregs, as we named ourselves, were in the diploma course. But there's a real sort of camaraderie amongst the group, and we started off with, I'm going to say it was about 20 something girls and 7 guys, and the 7 fellows ended up being 4 by the end of the course. So there was Ross Smith, who you'd know, Mike Miller, myself, and I think the 4th was David Fiddler. And anyway, so we were that course, and then the first year of the degree course was running. That was a 4-year course rather than 3. They got to do pathology in a real sense, whereas we didn't, and they had a few other things that they were exposed to as well. So we got the 3-year diploma course, which was full on. It was 36 contact hours a week, and then you'd have your study on top of that. And certainly in the last year, it was, we were full time. No, plus it was a really compact course, but I loved it. I loved every moment of it. It fired up everything in me that it possibly could, and much of the things that we were being taught then still really interest me today. Anatomy, it's all about anatomy, physiology, and pathology. And then you'd sort of learn particular cases around that. So quite different to the case-based learning that I think's come since. And and I loved anatomy, and I loved the pathology. And you asked the question before, was, I had no exposure to biology or health, or there was no one like that in our family. And so this was just a totally new world to me, and one that I think fired a lot of interest. So,
from a personal perspective, why do you think you're a better student going to physio than you were, say, when you decided to do the physics?
Excellent question. Well, the thing is, if we failed, we would never be a physio, and because there was no other year. In fact, we were picking up people who'd failed some previous years with us along the way, and so it was the one opportunity. Plus, also, it was something that really interested me. So I didn't have to work hard to do it, because I just found myself reading more and more and more, because I wanted to find out more of this book that was never going to end. It's
yes,
yeah. So I think that's what got me going.
And was there a particular reason why you went to that particular university? Was there a...
I could say that's probably the only one that had me, but I didn't actually apply to anyone else. I didn't. It may have been the only one in Melbourne at the time, I think. Okay. Because I don't think Melbourne Uni didn't have a physio course at that stage, because we did anatomy with the med students, and also at Lincoln Institute, which then became La Trobe, we had speech therapy, occupational therapy, and ourselves. I don't think there was another physio school in Melbourne, so, and I certainly didn't think of travelling interstate.
Yeah. And were there any other particular highlights for you in that undergraduate year? Like, it was obviously a full on.
Yeah, many, I think, but almost too many to remember. Look, I think it was a very social sort of thing, but everyone, there's a real buzz about it. Everyone really enjoyed the subject matter, not only within physiotherapy, but also within, obviously across the other therapies as well. We had this concurrent degree course, and we socialised a lot between us too, and I have many great friends from there. And then quite a few students either had brothers or sisters doing medicine at the same time, just up the road at Melbourne Uni. And so there was quite a bit of social interaction with the med students and other things too. Plus we were in Melbourne, in Carlton, so it wasn't out at Bundoora. It was, right smack bang in the middle of Carlton, which was, a fantastic place to be studying, really.
Yeah. And on completing those studies, like graduating as a physio, what do you sort of remember most about becoming a physiotherapist?
Yeah. I remember the 4 guys that were left. We decided we'd celebrate by going and playing golf that morning, the next morning. And true to form in Melbourne, it rained, it poured, it just teemed down. And we squelched around 18 holes of golf. And I think that was a real bonding sort of thing there, if there wasn't before. That aside, look, it was one of relief, but also of real excitement as to what's next. And so a large part of our third year was, we had 3 major 6-week placements for neuro, orthopedics, and thoracic. And then we had, I can't remember how long the other ones were, but I'm going to say there were 2 or 3 week placements and others too. So it was a lot of placements. And so we actually had derived a lot of sort of patient contact and interaction and that sort of thing along the way. So we were, I think, pretty reasonably equipped to go in and practice. But I think certainly in those years, it was sort of like your first year was, we were just coming out of an era where your first year was almost like your justification year or something, where we had to, you're pretty much on, sorry, I've forgotten the word.
Like an internship almost?
Yeah, pretty much an internship. But it was never, I think in previous years it was formalised. I think we were just entering an era where it was less formalised. And remember, so we graduated in 1975. In 1976, physiotherapy became a first contact practitioner across Australia by dint of, who was it? Prof Craig Purdam was the doctor. Who was the physio? I should know this. Anyway, it was one of the MNIPS guys. It wasn't Jeff Maitland, it was someone else. And it might have been Bob Elvey, actually. That had a lot to do with almost changing the face of physio as we were entering it, So Ross Smith and I got a job within a week of graduating, working for a high volume practitioner in north of Melbourne called Roger Worth, I think his name was, and he would book something like 6 or 8 patients an hour, and that was our introduction to commercial physiotherapy. And both of us were found it frustrating of that sort of model, but it was an opportunity, and it paid some money, which was pretty fantastic in those days. And we might have even influenced a few people to improve a little. So we did that, and then there was that big decision of where you were going to go. So many went into the major hospitals, and in fact, everyone pretty much went into hospitals, be they big city or regional. And my real thing, having spent 3 years of travelling in and out of town to Melbourne Central from Glen Waverley on train, so it was an hour in and out each day. So I thought I'd really like to get out of the big city of Melbourne. It was only 2 million people at that stage, not 5 million that it is now. Anyway, so the opportunity came up that this Geelong-based hospital was advertising some positions. And so one of my other diploma graduates, Margot Reed, and I both went down to Geelong. We went down for the interview. and it was halfway through the interview that we realised that we'd already been pretty much hired, because any graduate was a good graduate in those days, I think. So, so we got the job working at the hospital, and which was one of the best things I ever did. The first year was sort of medical chests and whatnot, which in itself wasn't inspiring, but the great thing was working within this hospital, going to all the case meetings. I just learnt so much about the medical system and medical cases and those things through the specialists who ran all of these different case meetings that you could attend to, and it's something that I still hold very dearly, I think, and of course lots of great relationships with the medicos and all the other staff in the hospital at the same time, and just great experience in interacting with people and getting to know what people who are really ill look like and how they might present. And I became quite interested in just the medical conditions side of things that sat alongside whatever our ask was.
A bit unusual to have gone into private practice and then come back out and gone into the hospital.
That was just, may I say, yeah, good point. That was just was it 2 weeks or 6 weeks locum?
Okay.
It was only a locum. I wasn't a real one. I can tell you I wasn't. Yes, I was always going to be looking for this sort of more full-time position. I think that was just when that was David Worth, not Roger Worth, and he had gone on holidays. I think Ross and I were doing morning and afternoon or something like that. I think that was the day. Yep. Yes. So I was a year and a half in hospital. The first 6 months of the following year, I got to work in orthopaedic outpatients, and I loved that. More the condition. I had no interest in doing sports, I'll tell you, at that stage. But it was more just doing orthopaedic outpatients. And after about 6 months, I was approached by a doctor down there who wanted to set up a physio clinic alongside his practice, and he was inviting me to go and join the practice. And about the same time, one of the really experienced local physios, John Lee, who I hold in great stead, he was just wonderful, and he was also looking for someone to work with him, and he was just around the corner from the hospital. So I would work half-time in that practice, and then half-time at the hospital for a while. And then he was a physiotherapist for Geelong Football Club, and he and a doctor, the Geelong club doctor, was setting up a sort of a sports medicine clinic, and so they got that up and going, and then invited me to join that for my other half. So I was sort of half-time practice and half-time in the sports medicine clinic. So this would have been about 1978, 79. By that stage, sport became more interesting to me, and I'd taken up just offering my services to one of the local amateur football clubs, Geelong Amateurs it was in that stage, and which was great from so many things, just both the experience. It was quite a mature club. It played in the we're in B grade amateurs, so we play up in Melbourne a lot of the weeks as well. And that was the start of getting to meet a lot more people in Geelong, and also being much greater experience in sport. So when I went to Geelong, or Margot and I went to Geelong, I did not know a person outside, and then just met people through the hospital and outside. And I think by the end, I felt by the end of leaving Geelong, that, you feel like 30 or 40% of, it was a fantastic thing. It was very open country town, and it's something, again, I hold near and dear in my life experiences.
In the background, was anybody guiding you, or were you getting a mentorship from anybody with these sort of key decisions that you're making, or were they just all off your own bat?
I guess the decisions, most of which I fell into, I'll be quite honest. But in meeting John, he was, I found he and Kevin Trelfall, the doctor, inspiring for their time. They were both people who had this incredible thirst for knowledge, for innovation and looking to new ways of managing their clientele, new technologies. And let me tell you, in the 70s and early 80s, there's a lot. We're being bombarded with lots of new and different things. John was fantastic. He would go to every course available, and of course I'd go with him. And so, we're exposed to Vladimir Yanda back in 1977, I think it was. And
I met him in Canada.
Oh, did you? Yes.
Yeah.
And Robin McKenzie and Brian Mulligan, and all of these fabulous courses. And they, the Mulligan courses I found just inspiring. They he was this guy who really had thought a lot about how to get efficient techniques that would really help people along and encourage them to be able to. Now, this is very MINIPS based and musculoskeletal based or whatever, but and of course, but along with that, and I think this is the interesting thing in sports, that there's always been this sort of the interest on the exercise side. And so 1977 or 8 was when we got our first isokinetic machine. It was a Orthotron, and then a Cybex within a year after that. So we were using isokinetic machines, looking at quantifying imbalances and optimizing ways of testing and that sort of thing. Even then, and at that stage, I was again through John's encouragement and mentorship involved in both the SMA and APA, or Sports Physio Group, committees up in Melbourne as well. So I've been going up and down to committee meetings there. So yeah, that was me pre-institute. I think of the things that probably shaped me through that period. So the great thing about the sports medicine clinic was that it wasn't all football. We'd get our local athletes and the myriad of netballers and swimmers and all sorts of things. So there was really quite a broad clientele.
Somewhere in there, you must have started getting an interest in the feet, because I remember, I think one of the first PD courses, it is absolutely downpouring here. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but it's our internet connection is going unstable.
No, I can't.
You can't hear it?
I wonder what was happening to you.
No. It is really raining. 1982, I think I was down in Tasmania, and you came down and did a foot biomechanics course. Does that ring a bell at all?
I would have thought 82 may have been a bit early for that, Doug, but I'm not.
Oh, no,
not
yeah,
sure.
sorry, 87, 89, 89, 90.
No, that makes a lot more sense. Okay. Yes, I saw you had that written. And so my original interest in feet, along with hands, was the sort of Carlton-born manipulation side of things. I might even still have the book. And I can't remember who. It was one of the many courses we attended. I can't remember for the life of me who did the instructing them. But no, all credit for the foot courses really should go to Peter Stanton. So Peter joined us in 1986 at the Institute, and he had a real interest, along with Graham Van Can, and they were running courses around Australia. And he got me very interested in it, and had a lot to do with the sort of understanding it all, and I had to, this was something new, so I really had to put in some hard yards to sort of get up to some sort of speed. And then well, they were running many of the courses as well, and I just happened to do it at times when I was asked, or if they were unavailable, I think. But it is something that certainly shaped us, and certainly Peter and I in particular were very interested in at that stage in the foot biomechanics, but also optimizing them with making the orthoses and those sorts of things too. And that was just one of those sidelines, I think.
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting because I've always been amazed. I've always had an interest in feet, but as an undergraduate, it seemed to be we would do the neck, but we wouldn't do the jaw. We do the cervical spine, thoracic spine, and lumbar spine. We wouldn't do the pelvis, and then we jump down to the hip and the knee, but we wouldn't do the foot. And it just seemed to be these really glaring areas biomechanically that I don't know why, but they were just never covered. And so when you came down to Tasmania, this course, biomechanics came about.
Doug, it's a very great observation. And sorry.
No, that's fine. I just remember getting this little goniometer and measuring hindfoot angles and forefoot angles. I thought, wow, this is really good.
Yeah. I know, and I had the same sort of passion and interest, I think, too. That yes, and those areas were really left out hanging, I think, and so similarly with the pelvis. Golly, someone would present with, I don't know, something around the pelvis, and we just didn't have any system to examine them, much less treat them, and in fact, even, and we, when you do rowing at any stage, you end up with a lot of rib injuries. So actually really trying to understand some sort of biomechanics or accepted biomechanics around how the ribs move and how they don't move and why people get issues and those sorts of things. So really having some sort of underlying system, and of course many of them have been challenged, but you've got to have something rather than nothing to at least start with, so the anatomy hasn't changed much, so certainly some understanding. And in the pelvis classic case, does it move, doesn't move, and all that stuff. I won't go into that in this particular interaction, but they're all things that have challenged us, particularly for you and I during our times too, because some information and something of a start is better than nothing, and then we can start critiquing it and seeing what gives us or what helps us help those patients.
Yeah. Now let's just jump onto a little bit of a different topic. Between 82 and about 2017, I've got down you're head of physical therapies at the Australian Institute of Sport. What were your roles there? Like, what were you doing?
Yeah, well, I was head of a department of one for about a year or 18 months, I think, and I never, I'll be honest, I didn't really see myself as a managing head in any way. It was just sort of the person there first, I think, but had so many great staff along the ways, which is, and I saw my job as much as anything to try and allow them to be as good as they possibly could be, and expand and into whatever opportunities they got, both within sport and within physio. So my roles were probably a management or more it's probably more representative role in those earlier years, and probably that's continued through. You mentioned along the other big role in the early years was really being part of a support team for many sports. My early sports were probably more athletics and swimming. Then basketball came along, and I went to, it was 5 Olympics with the Boomers, but there was also women's basketball and soccer, and I think I've rounded it out at one stage of having done them, done something with everyone, gymnastics and weightlifting. We had the World Weightlifting Championships in Canberra I can't remember which year. So it was fantastic. So it was really very much sport, and all these other things were on the side, So you mentioned the teaching, but that was really more a spin-off of the, I guess, the different exposure we were getting every day to these challenging athletes, having to learn more, and then feeling the responsibility is too strong a word, but feeling as though we were in a full-time position in sport, which didn't exist too much in those days, paid by the government, and that if we could be sharing this knowledge with others, and we'd all of us thought that that's something really that fits within our remit, and that was something that sort of became unwritten, but I think across all disciplines, teaching role seemed to be front and center. Also, yes, some mentoring, perhaps, but less so in the staff. Many of them were great practitioners in their own right. They didn't need me, but in fact, we learned so much from each other, and I think that was a great thing across so many of those years. Both check and challenge, as well as people came with different skills or different viewpoints, and I feel very, very privileged to have been part of it.
Was that a position that you apply for, or did you get asked to take on that head of physical therapies?
Yeah. No, we had to apply, but there's a small story around this. My father, who was an engineer with the Department of Works, and originally in Melbourne, but they got shifted to Canberra in 1976, and Dad came up here and he's working with the department. His role was overseeing the upgrade of all the tarmacs in the airports to take the new 747 jets. So that's what he did, and I came up to visit them one Christmas, and I'd heard about this Institute of Sport place, and I was driving out of Canberra, and I thought I'll just swing by and see what's there. And well, there wasn't very much there at all. There was an indoor stadium and an outdoor stadium, and the sports science area was at the outdoor stadium. Dick Telford was there, and now I knew Dick from Melbourne and SMA days down there and all the interactions. And he said, "Oh, look, we're advertising for a full-time physio. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Oh, look, I really like my job, but I'll go home and think about it." And I think he might have rung me again, and but others, and they'd opened applications, so there are lots of other people who applied. It wasn't just a singular recruitment, and so I had to come up and have an interview. And so there was Dick Telford, Don Talbot, Ken Maguire, the doctor, I think, and maybe someone from HR. So it was a highbrow thing. And then so I had a nerve-wracking interview because it was probably the first real one in my life. But at the end they said, "Oh, look, if you're fitting out the physio, what sort of equipment do you think you could list out the equipment for us?" And I was offered the job a couple of weeks later. It was interesting. What would it have been? It was about a 20%, 30% pay cut, actually, to come up. from private practice, but that's normal. But it was just, and I thought, I'll just go up there for a couple of years and help them set it up, and then go back to Geelong, because that was, that had been so good to me. But
and what do you think got you over the line, just out of interest? Like what in getting the job? There was a lot of applications, but what do you think it was that they saw in you that they wanted to capture?
I don't know a lot of the rest of the field. No, I don't know. I was only 27 or something, so really I would have thought too young. But look, I'd been, as I've just shared, really fortunate through living in Geelong, but being exposed through Melbourne on the committee side, and I'd even started doing some lecturing down there prior to going up, and maybe it was just those things. I don't know. Yeah. And I think, and I guess I was in a position where I was, able to see lots of, be exposed to lots of sport, and that. I don't know.
Yeah. And during that tenure at the AIS, you also did your postgrad in 92, was it?
I did that postgrad diploma. I think we talked about before, and so that was a Di Hopper was our may she rest in peace, but she was our mentor through that, and
you did that in WA?
that was through Curtin. Yeah. So it was through Curtin. Oh. Didn't know that?
No. So you did your postgrad diploma in sports in 1992. I did. Yes.
How
come I didn't see you?
I have no idea. Well, we were shut away at King's College. Is it King's College? Is that the name of it? We stayed in there. Kingswood College, is it?
Oh, Kingswood, yes, opposite UWA.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we stayed there, and it was, so we had a 2-week intensive each year, or maybe I think we did that twice, and it was 3 years. So we, in the first year, we had to do, I can't remember, stats and physiology and something else, and then the following year we did something, and then and then we had this in-service where, and in fact, and the musculoskeletal guys were also being examined in something at the same time, because I remember us having to do our exams over at what's the name of the hospital there? Charlie Gardner.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
you didn't do the full-time year. You did it in 3 breakdown bits.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No, it was 3 years part-time. So we were all, working and being a hermit over here instead.
So you travelled back and forth for 3 years to WA to do that postgrad in sports?
I think we only went over twice, perhaps. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you have much to do with the postgrad sports, the full-timers?
I think I can't remember. I think we did. Yeah.
I'm just asking because my wife was doing that at the same time. Well, my wife-to-be was doing postgrad sports. So I'm just surprised there was this secretive group going around.
I am sure there was a couple of things where we all got together. But I can't remember the detail. I'm sorry, Doug. Yeah.
So how'd you find going back to school after 20 years of graduating as an undergrad? How was that?
Yeah. I loved it, really. I really enjoyed, it was taxing, and some of it, some of it was a sort of a bit pure, but one could see the necessity. But the other side of it was just more and more learning and more reading, and and I guess I've been a bit of a nerd in just enjoying learning different things and new things. So that was it was looking back, it wasn't as much imposters as I think I felt it was at the time. but
you
it was
were
something
working at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that was all that was available to us. But And it was, these are times though, where there are very few PhDs in physio, and precious, I would say next to none in sports. You know, there are a couple in on the Musk side or Manip side, and they were only just starting to happen, I think. So, you know, it was really as much as one could do then. We got the opportunity then to upgrade it with another 2-year part-time. So this is 5 years in all, to take this up to a master's. And the master's we had to do a research project as well. So yeah, that was our
a little story around that. I can very clearly remember the conversation with Lance Toomey in the corridor when we finished our postgrad at Minips, and he said, look, you only have to do another unit and some stats and you can upgrade it to a master's. And I just looked at him and said, no way. I'm not coming back. I've had enough of this place.
Yeah, no, go on.
During the your AIS period time, you were also Deputy Director of Athletic Services for a few years. What did that involve?
That was it was about 2013, I think. So that was it was, I guess, the representative of through the essentially the health area. So it was medicine. It was the head, if you like, across medicine, physio, strength and conditioning, psychology, nutrition, and athlete care and education.
Wow. And was that something you did concurrently as the AIS, or were they kind of two hats, two separate things?
It was sort of concurrently, but it was an awful lot of meetings. Given my druthers, I wouldn't have done it that way. I wouldn't do it that way again. But it was just the way it sort of worked out at the time. But yeah, I don't think it was a fantastic experience. Can I say, so having the role of how performance teams fit together, not only in AIS in Canberra, but in fact, we were probably externally facing as much as internally facing. So this is actually looking at the performance support teams across the 36 sports within Australia as well. As in fact, to be fair, most of how the departments were running in Canberra did, they were really self-sufficient, and so it was more representative and collegial rather than requiring a lot of direction as such. But there's some challenges at the time, but so much more of it was about getting this wonderful look at Australia's sports system. Over that time, Nick Brown and I performed a needs analysis across our whole sports system of what we're required to actually optimise how that whole sports system worked. Unfortunately, it didn't quite come to fruition because a couple of other things overtook it, but it was again an amazing experience, I think, and working with some fantastic people, not only within the institute and across all those disciplines, but then across the whole of the sports system. There's some relationships that have been ongoing.
What sort of role do you feel more comfortable in? Like, is it clinician, or is it mentor, researcher, management? Like, where do you feel you naturally just incline towards?
Oh, that's such a question. I love being. I really enjoy the challenge of them all, I'll be honest. in very, very different ways. And I think one of the things that's really, I think, kept me young, kept me interested and enthused has been the diversity. You know, that I think you'd understand me well enough that I'm a very passionately involved clinician, and I love the clinical challenge, you know, and to this day I still do. But I've been so fortunate, I think, in my career that I haven't had to make a living solely from that. You know, that I have had that opportunity to seek more knowledge, help pass that on, work with others and mentor them. I've had this, and out of this director type role as others, I have this real interest in optimization of teams around sporting teams, you know, the support teams, and how they work and how we might help them to work better or understand themselves and that sort of thing. So there's so many of these different challenges and areas of interest that that having this diversity, I think, has been something that has been really good for me. And I think, so I can't nail a favourite, and I won't, because they all do and challenges in different ways.
Yeah. You completed your specialisation in sports in 2009. What was it that attracted you to the specialisation process?
It was, I wanted to be a better clinician, or, you know, and I think the big thing about it was that, you know, we can all be good or decent in our chosen areas of speciality, but I think the thing I really enjoyed about that process was sort of picking up your weaknesses, you know, so making you a more whole practitioner, and that's something that I think I like to share with many, you know, that we can all learn more, you know. So I can now treat the upper limb to some extent, which is something that I very rarely saw much of, Doug, in, you know, apart from the early years swimming, that you know, I've pretty much been a lower limb guy. So actually taking me back there, but also, you know, appreciating and getting upgraded, you know, on the pain science side of things and biopsychosocial side, and then this, you know, the whole load science side. All of these things, I think, are you know, I see them as all sort of additive, you know, that we're adding them on to, you know, what are largely personal models within practitioners. But yeah, that was something that I felt I gained a lot of out of the specialisation process.
Was there something that you found particularly challenging in the process?
The trying to do seeing complex cases in an hour. You know, sometimes I've been known to spend, you know, 2 hours and more with some of the really difficult people I've seen. So actually really trying to pull it back to under an hour, but also doing it under scrutiny, and I found that really, really nerve-wracking. Yeah, so it's not something that came easily to me, and I think, and I see that in pretty much every candidate, that, you know, it's easy to do these things and talk about these things, but doing it under scrutiny is something that I think challenges us all, and that's something almost that helping the candidate pass that, I think, is often one of those real moments to them getting where they need to get to.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And we chatted with Craig Allingham a little while back on Physio+10, and he went to 4 Olympic Games, but you've topped that with 5. I mean, 4 is amazing. 5's very amazing. What brought you back to the Olympics, for 20 years, so to speak?
Oh, it's look, I think it was never really a conscious thought of going back for another. It was almost the conscious thought was that sooner or later I've got to get off this merry-go-round, because there's this this constant evolution from one Olympic cycle to the next, and we live that in all our years, that from day to day at the AIS as well. So go through Olympic cycle with whatever team, and mine happened to be either athletics or basketball, and finish that, and you think, well, but we can do better, and so you tune up the things that we think, get maybe some new athletes and different approaches, maybe a different coach, or and we can do this better. So constantly evolving to try and do things better. But for me, there was a very natural endpoint, and so I never really think of it as 5 Olympics and stuff. It was more, my first Olympics was, the basketball team was very mature at that stage. It was your Ray Borners and Andy Camels, Phil Smyers, those people. But then that was in '84. In '88, we were starting to, Andrew Gaze came through, and then there was a Luke Longley, Mark Bradkey, Andrew Vlahoff, all two good Western Australians there. Boys. And the thing was that I'd been with them as a junior team in 1985 at the World Championships. So that effectively I stayed with those players, Gaze, Longley, Vlahoff, Shane Heel, through to 2000, which is when they were all stepping down. It was a very logical place for me to step down. And of course, I've been married a year or two previous to that, so somewhat late in life. We just had our daughter, and so it was a very easy decision, I can tell you, but a very, but fantastic experiences and enriching times, I think, don't go over that period. So, no, it was time, and it was the most comfortable decision in the world, I'll tell you.
That was the same year, obviously big year for sports in Australia, that you received the Australian Sports Medal. Was this a surprise to you, and how important is such an award for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. There was no precedent for the Australian Sports Medal, and so we didn't really know what what people had to do, what it meant, or and I'm still sort of wrestle a bit with sort of what it meant. But I mean, it was wonderful to be honoured, and then I think of so many, and it was wonderful to see so many others honoured with that. People who'd really given a lot to sport over the previous many decades, and I think it was part of the sort of nice celebration around the whole Sydney quest as well. So yeah, no, it was nice. But.
Yeah. Speaking of awards, you've also got a DSC, which is a bit unusual. Most people end up getting a PhD when that sort of comes to that sort of award system. Can you explain a bit about what the DSC is?
Well, this it really came out of the blue. It was not something I was expecting. This was it's an honorary DSC from La Trobe University. So, and I believe that it maybe even sits a bit higher than a PhD. But I don't know academia well enough. But this was again, as I said, very unexpected from the university in recognition of, I guess, the publications, research activity, as well as the involvement with sport and other things perhaps we've talked about. So, and with that, I was very honoured to have a professorship as well. So, yes, they've been very overwhelmingly good to me, and it's something I am truly honoured to receive.
You'd mentioned early on that you didn't know what a shoulder and an elbow were as far as treating wise, but your focus has been very much lower limb and tissue loading responses, rehab, tendons, and that sort of stuff. Was this a deliberate focus for you? Like, did you have a particular fashion for the focus for the lower limb? Was it just something that you found with what you were seeing?
Very much so. That it was the challenges that we faced every day. You know, how do we get those done Achilles better or patella tendons better in basketball? You know, so patella tendons were really poorly understood if I go back 30 years. And so it was a matter of just trying to get a grasp. And at that stage, so I can vividly remember we had to do an assignment, Musk's assignment, as part of our undergraduate thing. And I did mine glibly on tennis elbow, you know, and thought I knew everything about tennis elbow at the end, but, you know, it was all based on Syriacs and not much more, because there wasn't much more out there at that stage. I think Nerschel, it was almost the year that Nerschel published that article, you know, about the grading and whatnot. So patella tendons were a long way behind that. There was in fact, in 1976, so again, my graduation thing, there were 3 cases published of Achilles tendinopathy published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine by, I'm pretty sure it was Bill Clancy. And that was the first article on Achilles tendinopathy in athletes. There was then a couple of, I think there were some articles either by Brian Corrigan or Ken Fitch, or maybe both together. And then not much more until quite some time later. Patella tendinopathy lagged behind that, or patella tendinitis in those days. So we knew very little. All we could do was cobble together stuff we learned in Achilles, and also it wasn't till an article in 1986, I think, by Williams, that gave us some insight into what was happening at a tissue level. You know, so that was one of the first things. So here we were scrabbling around in the dark, trying to, you know, understand little bits of tendinopathy. So that's what really fired that up. But at the same time, we're having stress fractures and all sorts of things. So yeah, that really drove the focus on the lower limb out of necessity, really. Yeah.
And from all the research that you have done, what would you say have been the key surprise moments for you from, say, maybe what you thought you were going to see, but actually what you found out?
Oh, that's such a hard question.
We can skip it.
Surprise moments. One of the hardest things was, if I talk tendinopathy, that, and this was, by this time, Jill and I had hooked up. She'd done her PhD from 1996 to 2000. And so we'd worked out there was a sort of degenerative type presentation of tendinopathy, which is what all the surgeons were talking about, right? And every article was about degenerative tendinopathy. But then it was quite apparent to us who were seeing these early tendinopathies in young athletes that there was some early stage that no one was talking about. Williams talked a tiny bit in his article that there appeared to be subtle ground substance changes in these tendons, but otherwise there was nothing. He had a series of 800 tendons where any person with Achilles that didn't get better in 3 weeks went to surgery. And then he published all the pathology results. 3 weeks or 6 weeks? 3 weeks, I think. And so he had this subset of which, you know, we surmised was the early tendinopathy. So it was more about ground substance. So find out more about ground substance and then build up a model. This does this and this. So that was, but then trying to fit it all together. And so Jill came up to the Institute on a study scholarship for 2 or 3 months. And I think, and that's when we sort of worked on the continuum. So that was, we didn't know how that was going to work together. Yeah, and there's been bits and pieces from different people around the world that have really helped pull together the jigsaw, but we couldn't work out. But this, and there's still more to learn about it. You know, we're still new nuances that need to be added into our understanding, I think. So I don't know that I've answered your question well, but
well, no, that's fine, because it's research. You sometimes go into it with an idea and you're trying to prove something, and sometimes you go into it trying to see what you're going to find. And I just had wondered, from all the research that you've done, there've probably been stumbling blocks and there've been moments of realization where, you know, that light bulb moment which has said to you, oh geez, I hadn't put that together, and now I can see how it does fit together. I just wonder if anything popped in your mind.
Yeah, that's probably my closest at the moment, but given some preparation, I might come up with something else.
Here's an easy question. So as a physio, what's your number one goal?
Yeah, to as best as I can understand what I'm dealing with and why it's happened. And I think the second part of that, you know, because, you know, we've got our rehab processes for, you name it, you know, fresh fractures, stress fractures, you know, muscle strains, intramuscular tendon muscle strains, and all these other things. But the thing that's really continues to challenge me is the diversity in why these things fail. You know, and Mendegucha talked about it back in 2012 or whenever, you know, that that there are it's a multifactorial process to hamstring failure. You know, and so the person in front of you might have factors X, Z, and A, whereas the next person will have an entirely different set of factors around them. And so, and I think for us to truly solve the puzzle, it's a matter of going beyond the what to the why, and that's something that continues to you know, challenge my brain space, I think, but that's also the part that I really enjoy as well, you know. So coming up with hypotheses that but also trying to find some evidence that supports or negates the hypothesis, you know, that, you know, that whole clinical reasoning side, which I'll turn back to you.
I think the patient that gets me is the one that I'm listening to what they're saying, I'm understanding what they're saying, but I can't fit it into a framework that I can then apply some logic to then, you know, lead to a management strategy. So they're the ones that I feel lost. It's the ones that I say, okay, you got this and you got that, and I can see how that relates to this, and this is probably what's caused it, and therefore we'll go down this pathway. So I don't like having a patient where I don't feel like I've got a grasp of their picture, and that's what I think you're saying. You need to understand two patients can have the same symptoms, but the risk factors or the causative factors can be quite different patient to patient. You've got to delve into the why very much to get to that solution for that particular person. It's fun. It's fun.
Well, I think we agree there, and I think, and sometimes I get I guess saddened a little bit, when you hear, oh, someone's sick of physio or sick of doing this or doing that. But I think it's, and I wonder often, Doug, whether it's because they haven't got to that sort of place, if you like, whatever that is, of where, this, all hamstrings are not the same, all Achilles are not the same. In fact, whoever, and we hear this from all the practitioners around who see lots of any one of these, is that the more you look, the more there are differences in them, and understanding those differences and the why, and then how that shapes how you might approach that patient. To me, that's the thing I really love about being a clinician, for sure.
Here's another toughie. What's the most common bit of advice you find yourself giving to patients in a general sense?
I think it's very much about getting them to understand what's going on in their body. Now, sometimes that's enough for them, that they understand that, oh, this is something or another that will only partially get better, but if I manage it properly, then it's going to be fine. And I just need to know that. We sometimes have those patients who, gone out and done something really stupid, and here you are, you fix it, and then so I can go back out and do it again. They're a lost cause as far as I can. So, but yes, I think I spend far more of my time explaining to patients what I think is going on with them, and then how they can take on as much of the mantle of managing it as is possible. And I think that's probably one of the best things we can do for them.
As a physiotherapist, what would you say has been the hardest lesson that you've learned?
I can be wrong. Yeah. No, I mean, we all sort of have. Yeah, well, but it is, and I think I've, been through a number of experiences where I think I've had to relearn or revisit my approach to things, but I think that's healthy. I only wish I was better at this when I was younger. Than I feel I've had to be far more plastic as I matured. Got in fact really become quite senior, and I wish I was. I won't say I don't consider myself being bad at it, but I could have been much better when I was younger, and I think that would. But it, it can be very confusing when you're having all these different ways of doing things, and how do you sort the wheat from the chaff, and to be able to make a decision about what makes sense to you and your model, and how you're going to take things forward. And we didn't have social media in those days, which is almost like another layer again.
Can you describe 3 moments in your professional life that stand out for you?
This is where I'd like to press pause, because yeah, do you know, I saw you had these, and I think I thought about writing something. Oh, I might even have something. I do.
Oh, well, there we go.
So, yeah, so 3 things. Next. Yeah, so probably yeah, so the 3 things in my professional life. Sorry, I thank you for that time out. First of all is the amazing people and clinicians that we are able to interact with, and there are so many, not only in terms of their technical expertise, but also their interpersonal expertise as well. And I, you know, to me, I constantly get, yeah, really impressed by, you know, different practitioners in entirely different fields who are on top of their game and who can teach us so much and take us to places that we'd never considered. So they're and I've been so fortunate to meet a number of those that they are really meaningful to me. The second thing I have in this space is that of the whole knowledge growth aspect. That, you know, we related earlier how we only found out about Achilles tendon, the first publication, what is that, 46 years ago. So it's a young science, whereas bone has been around at least for 100 years. And we look at where these things have taken now. So much of what we learned as students was more at the macro level and a little bit of tissue science, whereas I think the thing that's fascinated me so much is what's happening at the tissue science side, and that for us to approach our management of it, it needs to make sense at tissue science level as well as the macro level, to really pull things together. So, you know, the bewildering knowledge growth in some of the areas that I look at are really something to behold, and I think one of the highlights. And the third thing, and this is going to sound really, yeah, probably a bit out there, but I still get blown away by the wonder of nature. You know, how we evolved. In fact, probably the last 5 years, I've been learning, you know, how the various theories around, and they're only theories. There's no set view on how we evolved from being slime on a rock, you know, to actually having these, you know, a singular cell is an amazing piece of engineering that that almost defies nature. You know, how did they come about? How did we come about? And how did we evolve to this crazy level now where we're talking to each other, you know, through some Wi-Fi, internet, you know, incredible thing. But if we look at nature, and it's hard not to look at other animals and, you know, and the similarities and differences with ourselves and that sort of thing. You know, to me, they're probably three things. And they're not entirely in my professional life, but they're the things that really. But our profession is built very much on these three things in many ways, isn't it? You know, right back to anatomy and physiology and understanding nature, if you like, and then how our knowledge has grown, and then how these wonderful thinkers have actually helped take us forward. You know, so.
And I guess also it's a good example. We talk about interdisciplinary work. So within the medical field, the doctor, the physio, the speech, the OT, the psychologist, saying I can look after a sports team. That to me is almost like a horizontal integration, but you're talking almost like a vertical integration. Like for our profession to go ahead, we had to evolve. We have to have relationships with tissue scientists that teach us about the microscopic level for us to, you know, manage a person at a macroscopic level. So I never really thought of it like that, but yeah, evolution is not only just horizontal working as a group, but it's also vertically as we develop greater awareness across professions that we need to know about for us to do our job as well. Yeah.
And I think, Doug, a great example of this, and all hail those who work in the area, is in the pain sciences, and that how that has changed our understanding and practice. And because of its potential, not only to be working in the sensory side of things, but also how it affects, you know, the actual motor side of things, and, you know, how it might affect athletic performance and other things as well. So I think that's been a great illustration of some of these principles that sits within our profession at the moment. I love it. I love it to death.
Do you want to elaborate on that a bit further?
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on that a bit further?
No, I don't know whether I need to, but I think well, I can. So there's some brilliant pieces of work in how we can see a change in the descending interneurons and both the cortical interneurons and also the descending pathways that can affect not only the pain pathways but also the motor pathways as well. And so that has certainly from Ebonie Rio's work, but Lorimer was intrinsically involved in this paper as well. How it's going to affect our understanding and clinical approaches to in part tendinopathy, but I'm sure it applies to many other things as well.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking on a parallel type of explosion of understanding, which is just starting to happen too, and that's going to influence us, is this sort of brain-gut axis as well. We talk about the HBA axis, but the brain-gut axis is going to become another big thing that we'll need to understand as physiotherapists dealing with primary contact practitioner as well. Yeah, big stuff. Hey, look, if you could step back to your younger self, and I know that's not that long ago, but what sort of 3 pieces of advice would you give yourself, or you'd like to share with yourself that you know now?
I think the first thing would be is that there's no substitute for gaining deep knowledge in a particular area, in your particular area of interest, or the level of knowledge you might require to look after some, assist a particular person or a particular condition. I guess I do have a concern with the reduction of things to 120 characters at times, and it can't possibly give you the understanding of the, maybe 20 or 30 papers and the inclusion and exclusion criteria and how they've arrived at particular conclusions, rather than just snapping the something out of their findings. And these sorts of things are incredibly important in truly appreciating the complexity of things. And so while I'm on that, probably the second thing is that, and I was one of these certainly, that it's very easy along with that to try and be reductionist in our thinking, that all muscle strains just need 4 weeks or 6 weeks, or all we've got to do is strengthen them and throw them back out, or whatever. Simple stuff. But then, as we've talked before, that we can't think of all these things as being the same. And in fact, the experts who see lots of these is that there are meaningful subsets in all of these things. And so rather than being reductionist, I think we need to appreciate far more the complexity that relates to these things. And I think I certainly in my younger years, as we all do, tended to be too reductionist. Whereas I think, the more I read, the more appreciative I am of the complexity, but also at times get bewildered by the complexity too. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I think there can be error in simplifying things, and I think I see this quite a lot clinically, certainly as a specialist and seeing things for second opinion. I think my third one's going to be totally different, and I think through both with talking with patients, but also talking with fellow practitioners or talking with practitioners in different disciplines, that we all find comfort with communicating with like people. Okay, but our challenge sometimes is when they're totally unlike us, and then you know, and so this might be a patient who thinks entirely differently to you, or it might be it could be a medical practitioner or a podiatrist or whatever, who has totally different model on things, and I think I would love to have known better, how to recognise when they were that unlike me, that I can't expect them to be thinking like me, that they think differently, they have different value sets and whatever, and how to better communicate to arrive at a more optimal outcome for that person, I think, or with that person if they're the treating practitioner. So that's really off the wall, but if I think back, I've had who I would have thought were difficult people as patients. A lot of that, I think, is, had I gone in with this mindset, I think I could have done better with them. And similarly, even with people I've worked with too, that I think I could have been better as a in a team approach, with appreciating the differences and I guess adapting my approach and my expectations accordingly.
That's great. I can think of some patients where I've come across them and I've sat down, I've been interacting, and I've just realized it's almost like there's a frigid wall floating around the two of us, and neither of us are really, and I've just had to step back and sort of say, you know, and maybe that's not. I'm just thinking about in a country practice, you get all walks of life, and you don't get to just assimilate with the types of people that you are as a professional person. And you really, I've almost trained myself to think of people as like a blank screen, and I've just got to say, right, where are you at? And this is how I can help you, and try and start to paint onto their canvas, but from their perspective. And I know exactly what you mean. I've certainly tripped up many times assuming something and then realizing quite late in the conversation that I haven't had the effect that I was trying to have, and I've had to restart. And that's a learning thing. Hey, looking forward, next 5 years or so, what are you wanting to achieve?
Sorry, I just missed that last word.
What are you wanting to achieve in the next 5 years?
Oh, me. Look, I'm planning on just doing less and less. I'll probably remain doing a bit of clinical work. As I said, I'm quite happy, you know, if I can share things that I know, but also I'm looking around for other people who could be doing that too as I step back, you know, certainly. And I'd like to be fully retired in 5 years' time. It's been 5 years since I've left the AIS, and it's been a really rich 5 years. And I must say, I've learnt a lot of new things across that 5 years that can be applied to my physiotherapy approach, but also I'm trying to learn things outside physio as well and improve my golf game and those things. But yeah, so in the next 5 years, I'd like to become more. I'd like to be watching others and looking at how the profession's growing and where it all goes, but very much from an armchair position, not doing much less, I think.
And sort of on a similar timescale, where would you like to see the physio profession going in the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a difficult question at the moment. We've been in positions where we've seen a real halcyon sort of period, I think, for physiotherapy. It's grown enormously. In some ways, it's grown so much that I love the special, the different subspecialties, and it can be an ED physio now, or people who just specialise in quite niche areas of cardiothoracic and other, or neuro, or whatever, and all of them have actually just got bigger and bigger. One thing I do think of as a profession is I sort of feel we're a little bit at the crossroads as to what a physiotherapist is, or and maybe it's many things, but I don't know. My concern is I don't know how well that's communicated to the public. That the public come along expecting a certain thing, and that sometimes I get some, that what they get is something very different, and so I think, it's not something for me to be part of, but I think, I think the profession determining what it is and how it wants to portray itself, but also then having done so, I think communicating that to the public, because it may well be that they'd be better off seeing other practitioners, exercise physiologists, or soft tissue therapists, or osteopaths, or whatever, so I think it is a matter, certainly, and I'm talking the mask sports side here, but of course it's different in different areas. I do believe our training, has a great ability to prepare us for most of these things, or it certainly did. But we are incredibly reliant on that training, and I know the universities have been smashed, and my real concern is that that hopefully that doesn't destroy the end product, but I'm not too sure how that's going to play. I think one of the other things is, I would like to think, is that, Doug, we sort of evolved in a period where you were almost all things to that patient, with the occasional visit to maybe a medical practitioner, and that was it. Whereas now there are far more, podiatrists and OTs and other things who take up and are far more specialised in areas than what we are, including probably exercise physiologists as well. So that, I think determining what we are and what we aren't, and then being prepared for those things to sort of be taken out would be appropriate. But I love, as I say, these subspecialities. I think the other side of it, and we've touched on this a number of times through this, is being that as we're learning more about different aspects, let's say of pain, or let's say even of testing something as simple as muscle strength or muscle properties, is evolving more meaningful and more accurate measurement tools that I think, so the thing I love about pain, the pain sciences now, is that with the development of the central sensitization assessment tool, that there are means of determining whether, with that and your sorry, I've forgotten the term, the cold pressure test, that we've got different ways of either including or excluding them from the subset. Whereas, if we think back 5 and 10 years ago, that person's not getting better because they've got chronic pain, or they're centrally sensitized. But we had no way of knowing whether we could legitimately include them in that subset or not. Now, similarly, other things such as, if I look at rehabilitating a muscle, so if we've got a lower limb muscle, we can look at Now, how much strength you can measure of your hamstrings, but we've got no way of articulating out each individual hamstring. So one of them can be dysfunctional and the other one's doing all the work and the other one's the one that fails. We haven't had great means, and we still don't have excellent means of testing calf strength, and calf strength is incredibly important to us. We can't, in a practice, there's very few means of actually assessing things like rate of force development or explosive type work. So all we can do is assess their slow strength. But when they go out in the football field or whatever, the muscle doesn't work at slow speeds, does it? It gets loaded incredibly quickly. So all of these things, I think, developing better assessment tools over time would be of real value to us. I think, there is a whole other school of thought around these sort of muscle balances and imbalances, and surely we've got to get better at this. Oh, that one looks a bit smaller than this one. Have we got exercise tolerance tests for them, or we got, can we use imaging in some way or some such, or some form of MG to and that's not without its problems, but to reflect recruitment. All of these types of approaches, I think we can get, and when you think of what we haven't got, we're still babes in the woods in so many of these areas, and these are critical areas certainly in the sports field, and I'm sure they are in others as well. To name but a few.
Now, before we say goodbye, do you want to pick up your laptop? Is it a laptop you're on?
Yes.
And just do a little tour of those certificates on the wall behind you.
No. I don't know how this is going to go.
Neither do I. I just, as an impromptu.
No. All right. It's pretty easy. Just tell me. I have no idea if that's coming up okay.
I can see it. Yep.
Hang on. So these are just the Olympic certificates. Sorry. Los Angeles, Barcelona. Los Angeles, Seoul, Barcelona.
Yeah.
An Olympians club thing. My wife made me do it. Atlanta and Sydney, which was really nice.
Cool.
Oops. There you go.
All right. Thank you, Craig, so much for joining us today on Physio+10. It's been an absolute gem to listen to your stories and have a chance to get some understanding about the things that you've learned as you've gone through your career as a physio. So thanks a lot for joining us. It's been really a great pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Doug. It's been a very humbling experience, and again, I love your work, and I do hope this is of some value to those who follow us. So thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Physio+10, in which I trust you gained some valuable insights. It'd be awesome if you could leave your 2 cents worth as a review or rating of this podcast, and I look forward to sharing the story of another trailblazing physiotherapist with you in 2 weeks' time. Stay safe. Bye for now.